She walked onto that base carrying a rifle older than half the soldiers standing there. They laughed. They pointed. One man called it a museum piece. She said nothing. Because the last time people underestimated Sergeant Lena Voss, 4 of her teammates came home in body bags, and every record of what really happened that night was erased before sunrise. Her name, her missions, her medals. Gone. Someone powerful enough to rewrite military history decided she needed to disappear. They almost succeeded. Almost. If you've never seen a story like this one, a soldier erased from existence who comes back to expose the people who buried her, hit subscribe right now and stay with me until the very end. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if this hits you the way I think it will, smash that like button. Let's begin. The helicopter hit the landing pad hard. Not a crash. Not even close. Just the kind of rough, no-ceremony landing that happened when the pilot was tired and the cargo wasn't considered worth impressing. The rotor wash scattered loose gravel across the tarmac in every direction, and 3 soldiers standing near the fuel depot turned their backs to avoid catching debris in their eyes. When the side door finally slid open, a single figure dropped down onto the pad. No aid. No escort. No gear beyond a standard-issue pack slung over one shoulder and a rifle case that immediately drew every eye in the vicinity. Not because it was large or threatening, but because of its shape. Long and narrow. Wooden stock visible through the worn canvas wrap. Private First Class Dominic Reyes, 22 years old and 4 months out of basic, leaned toward the man next to him. Is that? He squinted. Is that a bolt action? Corporal Jake Whitfield didn't even bother lowering his voice. That's a bolt action. Like an old one. Like a very old one. The figure walking away from the helicopter didn't react, didn't slow down, didn't look back, just moved across the tarmac with the kind of stride that didn't waste a single step. Not fast, not slow, just efficient in a way that was hard to explain but impossible not to notice. Sergeant Lena Voss stood 5'7" in her boots. Brown hair pulled tight, no rank pins on her collar, which was irregular enough to notice. Her uniform was clean, but it wasn't new. The kind of worn-in that came from actual use, not from being stored in a footlocker. There was a scar running along her left jawline that stopped just below her ear, the kind of scar that didn't come from training accidents. She carried the rifle case like she'd carried it 10,000 miles already. She probably had. The base briefing room smelled like burned coffee and old paper, which Captain Daniel Cross had long since stopped noticing. He sat behind a metal desk and opened the personnel file that had arrived 40 minutes ahead of the helicopter. He read it once, then he read it again. Then he set it down and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. The file for Sergeant Lena Voss was 11 pages long. That was the normal length for a soldier with 4 years of service. The problem wasn't the length. The problem was that 9 of those 11 pages were blank. Not redacted. He'd seen plenty of redacted files, the thick black bars where classified operations lived underneath. This was different. These pages were literally empty, white space where a record should have been, like someone had removed everything and not even bothered to fill in the absence with a cover story. 3 years of service had been quietly hollowed out. Cross had been in the military for 19 years. He'd seen paperwork mistakes. He'd seen files misfiled, corrupted, or transferred incorrectly through 17 different bureaucratic hands. He'd even seen 1 or 2 cases where a soldier's record had been partially classified at a level above his clearance. But he had never, not once, seen a file that looked like this. He was still staring at it when the knock came. Enter. She stepped inside and stood at attention without being told. Her eyes found the wall behind his head. Not the ceiling, not the floor. The exact spot that veterans landed on when they were being formally addressed and didn't want to give anything away. Sergeant Voss, he kept his voice neutral. I'm Captain Daniel Cross. I command this unit's field operations section. He tapped the file without breaking eye contact. I've been looking at your record for the last half hour. I want you to help me understand something. Sir? Where did the last 3 years go? No change in her expression. No flicker. That information is above your clearance level, sir. Cross leaned back slowly. Above my clearance level. Yes, sir. I'm cleared to the highest tier this base operates under, Sergeant. Something moved in her eyes. Not amusement, not irritation, something quieter than both. Then you should have your answer, sir. The silence sat between them for a few seconds. Cross studied her, the scar, the posture, the way she didn't fidget or shift her weight. Most people, most soldiers, when they were in a commanding officer's office and the conversation turned uncomfortable, they did something with their hands, adjusted a sleeve, touched their collar, something. She did nothing. He picked up the file. It says here you were processed through Fort Elson 3 years ago after a classified overseas operation. No details, no operational summary, no after-action report. 4 soldiers listed as KIA in your unit designation. But the incident itself doesn't appear anywhere in the accessible records. He paused. You're the only surviving member of that team. Yes, sir. And nobody has explained to you why your record was expunged. No one has needed to explain it, sir. Cross set the file down again. Who are you, Sergeant? Actually, she looked at him directly for the first time. Not the wall. Him. The person they hoped you would never have to meet. She was assigned to Barracks C, Bunk 6. Her bunkmates were Corporal Whitfield, Private Reyes, and a quiet Moldovan-American named Sergeant Petra Okafor, who had been assigned to the unit 3 weeks earlier and had already developed a reputation for being the best close-quarter shooter in the company. Okafor was the only one who didn't say anything about the rifle. Whitfield did not share Okafor's restraint. I have to ask. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk, cleaning a standard-issue scope. What is that? Lena was unpacking. She set the rifle case on her bunk and unzipped it without rushing. Remington 700, pre-modification variant. Whitfield stared. That's a hunting rifle. It started that way. We have equipment. He gestured vaguely toward the armory end of the barracks. Modern equipment, digital scopes, ballistic calculators, laser range. I know what you have. And you brought that. She picked up the rifle and held it. The stock was walnut, real wood, not polymer, worn smooth at the grip from years of use. The barrel had been modified, the action glass-bedded, the trigger set to a pull weight she'd worked out herself over a period of months. It wasn't what it looked like at a glance. But at a glance, she understood exactly what people saw. Every piece of tech on this base can be jammed, hacked, spoofed, or disabled, she said. This one can't. Whitfield laughed once, short and dismissive. You sound like my grandfather. She didn't answer that, just set the rifle down and went back to unpacking. Private Ethan Cole had the kind of face that had probably been good-looking once, before a few too many bad deployments and worse decisions had carved permanent tiredness into it. He was 29, which was old for a private, and he carried the seniority of someone who'd been busted down in rank at least once, and hadn't quite recovered from the humiliation. He found Lena at the equipment staging area that afternoon, where she was running function checks on her kit with the slow, methodical focus of someone who checked things twice and then checked them again. Cole stood and watched her for a moment before speaking. They're saying you're our new sniper support. That's right. They're also saying your file is basically empty. She kept her eyes on the scope she was checking. People say a lot of things. I'm not being unfriendly. He sat down on a crate nearby. I'm being honest. We've got a team here. We've been working together for 7 months. We've got a system. Bringing in someone new, someone whose record we can't verify, that's a variable. Variables get people killed. She set down the scope and looked at him. What's your kill rate at distance, Cole? He blinked. What? In the field. At distance. When you're using the standard issue setup with the digital ballistic calculator and the laser rangefinder and the full equipment package, what's your effective hit rate beyond 800 meters? Cole's jaw tightened slightly. That's not 60%? 70%? The equipment helps, but the wind still moves and the target still breathes and the calculation still has a half-second lag between assessment and execution. She picked the scope back up. Mine doesn't lag. Because of a 60-year-old deer rifle. Because I've been doing it since before the equipment existed. Cole stood up. He wasn't angry exactly. He was something more complicated. A man who'd been prepared to dismiss someone and was now recalculating, and didn't like what the recalculation was costing him. Don't get people killed, he said finally, and walked away. The mission briefing came at 2200 hours. Cross stood at the head of the table. Behind him, a digital display showed a topographic map of the northeastern mountain range. Sharp ridge lines, a valley corridor, elevation markers climbing well above 4,000 meters. General Victor Hale. Cross put the name on the screen next to the map. General Hale has been missing for 72 hours, Cross said. His convoy was ambushed on a forward resupply route. 3 escorts K1A. One surviving aide confirmed Hale was alive and moving when they were separated. He clicked to the next slide. We have a last known position from the aide's personal beacon. Here, he tapped the map. This valley, enemy-held territory, 3-kilometer approach through exposed ridgeline terrain. The room was quiet. The general's current status is unknown. The mission is to reach the last known position, verify status, extract if alive and viable, collect evidence of the ambush site if not. Cross set down the remote. This is a 4-person insertion. Hilo drops us 8 kilometers out. We cover the approach on foot. Whitfield raised his hand. Rules of engagement? Avoid contact. This is an extraction, not a raid. We are not starting a firefight in that valley if we can avoid it. Cross looked around the table. Questions? Okafor spoke. What's the drone coverage situation? Full package. 2 Predators maintaining high-altitude overwatch, thermal and optical. We'll have real-time feed to the tablet. Cross glanced toward Lena. Voss, you're our overwatch element. You position on the southern ridge while the team moves through the valley floor. Lena had been looking at the map since it appeared on screen. Not at the route Cross was describing, at the ridgeline to the northwest. What's on that feature? She pointed. Cross looked. Elevation 1460. Rocky outcrop. Nothing flagged. The drone coverage has a shadow zone there. The geometry of the high-altitude flight path means thermal returns from that position are degraded between 1430 and 1500 altitude, about a 70-meter blind spot on the northwestern face. The room was quiet. Cross looked at her. How do you know our drone flight path? I asked for the coverage map when I landed. She kept her eyes on the screen. That's where I'd put a sniper if I were trying to wait for something. Whitfield made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She's seen things that aren't on the screen. The blind spot is on the screen, Lena said quietly. You just have to know what you're looking at. Cross studied the map. Then he studied her. Noted, he said. We brief departure at 0400. Amid she didn't sleep. Not because she couldn't. She'd trained herself years ago to sleep in conditions that would keep most people staring at the ceiling. Cold, noise, discomfort, uncertainty. Sleep was a weapon and she'd learned to wield it. She didn't sleep because she was thinking. The mission profile was standard. The location was remote but manageable. The insertion window was clean, the weather forecast acceptable, the drone coverage, except for that one shadow, robust. All of it made sense. That was the problem. 3 years ago, a mission that made sense had gone catastrophically wrong in a location that looked just as clean on paper. Good intelligence, solid planning, full equipment support, a team that had trained together for months, and someone had known exactly where they would be. Lena lay in the dark barracks and ran the geometry of the northwestern ridgeline through her head again. The elevation, the shadow zone, the distance to the valley floor where the team would be moving. 840 meters at the nearest point. She'd made harder shots than that, but the question wasn't whether she could make the shot. The question was whether someone else had already calculated the same geometry from the other direction. They left at 0415. The helicopter was a modified transport, stripped down, no markings, the kind of aircraft that officially didn't exist in this sector. The pilot flew low and fast, terrain following through the mountain passes in the dark, the aircraft shaking and banking through corridors that would have been terrifying if any of them had been the kind of people who got terrified by that kind of thing. They were not. Lena sat nearest the door. The rifle case was between her feet, one hand resting on it without gripping, the unconscious contact of someone checking that a thing is still there without admitting they're checking. Okafor was across from her, running through her equipment checks for the 3rd time. That was a tell. Not inexperience, but the specific nervousness of someone who knew enough to know what could go wrong. Whitfield was asleep or doing a convincing impression of it. Cole was staring out the window into the dark. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. Cross sat at the front of the cabin, reviewing the tablet feed from the Predator drones. His face was blue lit in the dark. Every few minutes he scrolled the image, checking coverage, checking the valley, checking the elevation map. Lena watched him work. He was methodical, careful, the kind of commanding officer who didn't take unnecessary risks and didn't pretend to know things he didn't know. She'd served under worse, much worse. The helicopter dropped suddenly, stomach lurching, then leveled out. 3 minutes, the pilot said through the intercom. Everyone came alive. Whitfield opened his eyes. Cole turned from the window. Okafor stopped checking her equipment. Lena tightened the strap of the rifle case. The insertion point was a frozen plateau at the base of the ridgeline, flat enough to land on, remote enough that nobody had reason to be watching. The helicopter was down for 40 seconds, just long enough for 4 people to exit and pull their gear clear before the aircraft lifted and disappeared back into the darkness. Then they were alone. The cold hit immediately. Not the manageable cold of a difficult night, but the specific, aggressive cold of high elevation in the early hours. The kind that found the gap between your collar and your jaw and settled there with intent. Cross-checked the compass. Grid northwest. We move to the ridgeline and split. Voss, you take the southern elevation. The rest of us take the valley floor. He looked at her. You have the radio frequency? Yes, sir. Overwatch protocol. You report anything you see. Anything. I don't care how small. Understood. And Voss. He paused. What you said about the shadow zone, keep eyes on that feature. Already planning on it. She moved. The approach to the ridgeline took 90 minutes of hard climbing in the dark, using the faint pre-dawn glow above the eastern peaks as her only orientation reference. She moved without a headlamp. Light was a liability in the mountains. Not because any specific threat was watching, but because in this kind of terrain, you simply didn't know what was watching. She'd learned that at a high cost. By the time she reached her overwatch position, a natural rock formation at 1480 meters that gave her a clean sightline across the valley floor. The sky had shifted from black to the specific dark gray that came just before sunrise. She settled in behind the rocks, oriented the rifle, and began her assessment. Valley floor, 800 to 1100 meters. Good. The valley access route where Cross's team would be moving, visible along approximately 70% of its length. The northwestern ridgeline, elevation 1460, the shadow zone from the drone coverage, visible to her, clearly visible. The rocks up there formed exactly the kind of irregular profile that a trained spotter would recognize, hollows that offered concealment, angles that provided firing positions, the accumulated geometry of a location that worked. She settled the crosshairs on the northwestern feature and began to watch. Mouse. 30 minutes later, Cross's voice came over the radio. Overwatch, we're at the valley entry point. Entering now. Copy, Lena said. Valley floor is clear to visual. Northwestern feature. No movement observed yet. Copy. Keep watching it. Already am. She listened to the team's progress through the radio. Brief, coded check-ins as they moved through the valley floor. The professional shorthand of a unit that had worked together long enough to compress communication into essential syllables. Contact minus. Route clear. Moving. The valley was quiet. The sky lightened steadily. The drones hummed invisibly somewhere high above, their feeds appearing as tiny thumbnail images in the corner of Cross's tablet 400 meters below and northwest of her position. And then, at the northwestern ridgeline, at the exact boundary of where the drone shadow zone ended, she saw it. Not movement, not a figure. Something smaller. A reflection. The kind that came from a scope. The kind that lasted less than half a second before whoever held it shifted their angle. The kind that you only caught if you were already looking in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Lena's body made a decision slightly before her mind did. Her right hand came to the bolt, while her left steadied the stock. Her breathing slowed without her telling it to slow. She keyed the radio. Contact. Northwestern feature. Possible observer. Possible shooter. Range approximately 840. I have a partial indicator. Scope reflection. Cannot confirm target. A pause. Then Whitfield's voice, with the particular flavor of a man who'd already decided something before hearing it. Drones show nothing up there. I know what the drones show. Voss. Cross's voice, careful. What's your confidence level? She kept her eyes on the position. The reflection was gone. But something about the rocks was different now than it had been 30 minutes ago. The shadow fell differently. The profile of the formation was subtly changed. Nothing you'd put a number on. Nothing you could explain to someone who hadn't spent years looking at things like this. Hi, she said. Another pause. We're 200 meters from the general's last known position, Cross said. We continue. Voss, keep eyes on that feature. Whitfield's voice. We're going to slow the whole extraction because she's seeing things the drones can't. Whitfield. Cross. Flat. Radio discipline. The team moved on. Lena watched the northwestern rocks. Nothing. 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 And then, from somewhere below her, the sound of a voice. Not on the radio, not in her earpiece, but distorted and close, as if it were coming from somewhere within the rocks around her. Except that was impossible. She looked down at the secondary radio she carried on the left side of her vest, the one she'd been issued as a backup communication channel, the encrypted secondary frequency that was supposed to be used only for emergency contact with base operations. It was receiving. Someone was transmitting on her encrypted backup channel. She pressed the receive button. Static. Then a voice. Distorted. Processed. Deliberately altered the way a voice sounded when someone was using a scrambler but human underneath the noise. Still trying to save people who are already dead? The transmission cut out. Silence. Lena held the radio and did not move. Her hands were completely steady. That was training. That was years of learning to put the physical response somewhere outside of herself when the mental response was happening. But inside the discipline, something had shifted. Something cold and specific. Different from the cold of the mountain. She knew that phrase. Not the words themselves, but the tone behind them. The particular way someone had of framing a sentence like a question while meaning it as a statement. The implication of knowledge. The weight of history behind a single sentence delivered to an audience of one. Someone knew who she was. Someone knew she was here, on this mountain, on this specific mission. Someone knew about 3 years ago. She looked back at the northwestern ridgeline, the rocks, the shadow zone. Below, Cross's voice came over the main channel. Overwatch, we have visual on the general. He's alive. I repeat, General Hale is alive and mobile. We are proceeding to extract. The valley below her filled with the careful movement of 3 soldiers and 1 general moving toward the extraction point. And Lena Voss kept her eye on those rocks, because the voice on that radio had known her backup frequency. And backup frequencies on encrypted military hardware did not get known by accident. They got known by someone who had access to her equipment assignment, someone who had known she was coming before she arrived, someone on the inside. She pressed the push to talk. Cross. Be advised. I received an unauthorized transmission on my secondary channel. Someone has our frequencies. I'm saying again, someone has our frequencies. This may be a compromise. Silence on the radio for 2 seconds. Then Whitfield, and his voice had lost its mockery now, replaced by something tighter. That's not possible. These are encrypted channels, generated fresh for this. And that was when the shot came from the northwestern ridgeline. Not at Lena. At the valley floor below. The crack of a high-powered rifle reached her a fraction of a second after she'd already seen the muzzle flash. A brief, barely visible pulse from inside the shadow zone the drones couldn't see. And then the sound of shouting over the radio, and then Cross's voice cutting through all of it. Man down! Man down! General Hale is down! The valley below erupted. Lena was already moving. The rifle they laughed at came up into her shoulder. And the person on that radio knew exactly what was about to happen next. The muzzle flash from the northwestern ridgeline had already faded by the time Lena acquired the position in her scope. 840 meters. She'd ranged it twice before the shot even came. She already knew the distance the way she knew the distance to her own hands. What she didn't know was whether the shooter was still there. Some snipers fired and moved. Shoot and relocate. Basic doctrine, taught in every advanced marksmanship course on the planet. Fire, break position, re-establish somewhere else before the return fire arrived. It was the smart play. It was what she would have done. But this shooter had been waiting a long time, probably, which meant they were comfortable in that position, which meant there was a chance, not a certainty, but a chance, that they hadn't moved yet. Below her, the radio was chaos. Hale is down, he's hit. Left shoulder, he's breathing. Contact, where is the shooter? Drones are not showing. Repeat, drones are not showing the firing position. Whitfield, get him behind the rocks, get him down. Lena blocked it out. Not permanently. The part of her brain that monitored radio traffic kept running in the background like a process she couldn't shut off. But enough. Enough to focus on the northwestern feature and the specific cluster of rocks at 1460 meters elevation where the flash had come from. She counted. 1, 2, 3. On 4, she saw the movement. Not a person. You rarely saw a person when they were doing it correctly. You saw the absence of stillness, the way a rock that had been static for 30 minutes was slightly less static than before. The way a shadow shifted 2 degrees when nothing was moving through to cast it. There. She adjusted her position fractionally. Cheek to stock, eye to scope. The crosshairs settled onto the rocky outcrop and she started reading the environment the way she'd been reading environment since before most of the people on this mission had graduated high school. Wind. From the northwest, approximately 12 kilometers per hour, gusting intermittently to perhaps 18. The flags she'd mentally cataloged on the way up. Loose rock dust on exposed surfaces, the movement of sparse ground vegetation, told her the wind was steady right now, not gusting. That window wouldn't last. Distance, 840, confirmed. Angle. She was shooting slightly downhill toward a target that was shooting on essentially flat terrain, which added a small correction to the elevation hold. Temperature. Cold enough to affect the ballistics slightly. Cold air was denser, bullet drop marginally less than in warm conditions. She ran all of it without thinking about running it. It was the same calculation she'd made 10,000 times over 15 years, compressed now into something that happened below the level of conscious thought, the way a skilled driver didn't think about the mechanics of changing lanes but simply changed lanes. The shooter was behind a specific boulder. She could see the edge of the shadow that told her where a body mass would need to be to produce that shadow at this angle of morning light. She held. Below, Cross's voice cut through the noise with sudden authority. Everyone down! Voss, if you have a shot, take it. Take it now. She already had the trigger at the wall. The specific point in a trigger's travel where the next fraction of a millimeter would release the firing pin, the place you lived in for the half second before a shot where everything either came together or fell apart. The wind held. She squeezed. The Remington fired with a crack that the mountain swallowed and threw back at her in pieces, the sound arriving back from 3 different rock faces at 3 slightly different times, overlapping into something that wasn't quite an echo. Through the scope, she watched. For a moment, nothing. Then the shadow at the boulder changed shape. Something that had been vertical became horizontal. She worked the bolt. The spent case ejected and bounced off the rock beside her. She chambered a fresh round and held the position, watching, controlling her breathing, ready. Nothing moved on that ridgeline for 30 seconds. 40. A minute. She keyed the radio. Shooter is down. Northwestern feature, elevation 1460. I have eyes on position. No secondary movement observed. The valley below went from chaos to the specific controlled urgency of a team that had been through bad situations before and knew how to function inside them. Cross's voice shifted register. Still hard, still fast, but organized now. The panic replaced by something more professional. Copy, Overwatch. Whitfield, status on Hale. He's conscious. Shoulder wound, through and through, looks like it missed the subclavian. He's losing blood, but he's talking. Cole, outer security. Okafor, get a compression dressing on that wound. We are moving to the extraction point in 8 minutes. A pause. Voss, can you cover our movement from your position? Yes, sir. Then do it. She did. She watched the valley floor through the scope as the team moved, the crosshairs tracking across terrain features, pausing on anything that might indicate a secondary threat. The northwestern ridgeline stayed still. The drones, which still showed nothing on that position, even now, even with a dead shooter presumably lying in the rocks there, continued their lazy, high-altitude circuits overhead. The extraction point was a secondary plateau 500 meters northeast of the valley. She could see most of the approach route from her position. They moved. Nobody shot at them. She kept watching anyway. Well, the helicopter took 11 minutes to arrive once Cross called it in. Those 11 minutes were the longest kind, the kind where everything had already happened and the danger felt like it should be over but wasn't. The specific, suspended uncertainty of a situation that had gone wrong in ways that hadn't finished revealing themselves yet. Lena descended from the ridgeline and reached the extraction plateau at the same time the helicopter was on final approach. She was breathing hard from the descent. The same mountain that had taken 90 minutes to climb in the dark took 25 minutes to come down in growing daylight, and her left knee, which had been reconstructed twice, was sending her the specific hot signal it sent when she'd asked too much of it too fast. She ignored it. General Hale was sitting against a rock with Okafor's jacket pressed against his shoulder, and a look on his face that Lena recognized. Not pain, he was managing the pain. The look was something else. The look of a senior officer running calculations, assessing what had happened and what it meant and who knew what and what came next, even while bleeding on a frozen plateau at 4,000 meters elevation. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, face deeply lined, the kind of lean that came from decades of field work rather than anything deliberate. When he looked up and saw her coming down from the ridgeline with the bolt action over her shoulder, something moved across his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. She stopped. He held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away toward the approaching helicopter. She filed that away. The helicopter set down and they loaded Hale on a litter. Whitfield and Cole climbed in after. Okafor paused at the door and looked at Lena with an expression that was hard to read, something between respect and the specific unease of a person who had just watched something happen that they hadn't expected. "Nice shot," Okafor said. Lena climbed in. Cross was the last aboard. He pulled the door shut and the helicopter lifted immediately, banking hard toward the south and the base. Nobody said anything for several minutes. The adrenaline was metabolizing. You could see it in the small adjustments people made. Whitfield rolling his neck, Cole pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. Okafor checking and rechecking Hale's dressing with the focused movement of someone whose hands needed something to do. The specific come down from an operational situation that had gone sideways and then somehow not ended catastrophically. Then Whitfield said it. The drones never showed him. He wasn't looking at Lena when he said it. He was looking at the floor of the helicopter cabin. Drones showed nothing on that position the entire time, he continued. Nothing on approach, nothing during the incident, nothing after the shot. He paused. But she saw him. "I saw the shadow zone," Lena said. "I told Cross about it in the briefing." "You saw a reflection?" "Yes." "From 840 meters?" "Yes." Whitfield finally looked at her. His expression wasn't mocking now. It wasn't deferential either. It was the expression of a man who was recalibrating something and didn't entirely like what the new numbers were telling him. "I've been doing this for 8 years, he said. "I've never seen anybody pick up a scope reflection at that distance." Lena looked out the window at the mountains falling away below them. "Then you've been lucky," she said. "Or you've been working in places where people weren't trying hard enough to hide." The debrief at Black Ridge lasted 4 hours. Cross ran it. An intelligence officer named Lieutenant Ferris sat in the corner and took notes without appearing to take notes. The specific practiced invisibility of someone whose job was to collect information without influencing the collection. Hale was in the medical bay. The shoulder wound was serious but not critical. The The bullet had clipped the edge of the deltoid and fractured a piece of the scapula without hitting anything immediately life-threatening. He'd need surgery. He'd need weeks of recovery. But he was alive, and he was coherent, and somewhere in the next few hours he'd be giving his own account of the ambush to people whose clearance level was several tiers above this debrief. The team sat around the table, crosswalked through it in sequence. Insertion, approach, contact, extraction. He was methodical and fair. He didn't editorialize, didn't assign blame, just reconstructed the sequence of events with the professional detachment of a man who understood that accurate reconstruction mattered more right now than emotional processing. When he got to the shot, he stopped and looked at Lena. "Walk me through what you saw." She did. The reflection, the shadow shift, the wind red, the shot. She kept it precise and stripped of anything that wasn't directly relevant. Cross listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once and made a note. Cole, who had been sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw tight since they landed, spoke then. "Can we talk about the radio transmission?" Cross looked at him. "Go ahead." She reported receiving an unauthorized transmission on the secondary encrypted channel. Cole's eyes moved to Lena. Secondary channels on this mission were generated fresh at 0300 this morning. Frequency rotation, new key pairs, standard pre-mission protocol. The only people who should have known that channel assignment were the four of us, you, and base operations. The room sat with that. "Unless it was a lucky scan," Whitfield said, but he didn't sound like he believed it. "Secondary channel frequency space isn't something you scan lucky," Lena said. "The bandwidth is too narrow and the rotation pattern is non-sequential. You'd need the assignment key." "What did the transmission say?" Ferris asked from his corner. His voice was mild and unremarkable, the kind of voice that didn't call attention to itself. Lena looked at him. She'd been peripherally aware of him since the debrief started, his position in the room, the angle of his writing, what he wrote down, and what he didn't. It said, "Still trying to save people who are already dead." The room went quiet in a particular way. "That's it?" Cross asked. That was the complete transmission. And the voice was disguised. Scrambled, deliberately altered, but human underneath it, yes. Ferris wrote something down. Cole leaned forward. "What does that mean? Trying to save people who are already dead?" "I don't know," Lena said. She did know. Or she had a strong hypothesis that she wasn't sharing yet, not in this room. Not until she understood who else in this room might already know the answer. Cross studied her for a moment. The look of a man who suspected he was being given partial information and was deciding whether to press on it or leave it alone for now. He left it alone. "The shooter," he said. "We need to go back for the body." "Already requested," Ferris said. "EOD team is doing an approach on the northwestern feature now. We'll have a report within 2 hours." "Good." Cross closed his notebook. "Until we know how that frequency was compromised, we operate on the assumption that we have a security issue somewhere in the chain. Nobody discusses mission specifics outside this room. All future communications go through the base encryption system, not personal devices." He looked around the table. Questions? Nobody had questions, or everybody had the same question, and nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. The question of who had known. Lena found the armory empty at 1400 hours and used the quiet to clean the rifle properly. It was a ritual more than a necessity. The round she'd fired was the only one. The barrel didn't need extensive cleaning after one shot, but ritual mattered. It was the kind of thing you did to stay attached to the reality of what you were doing, the physical maintenance of a tool as a way of maintaining your own internal calibration. She was halfway through when Cole came in. He stood near the door for a moment, which told her he'd thought about this before coming, had decided to come, and was now second-guessing the decision. She kept working on the rifle and waited. "I owe you something," he said finally. "You don't." "I said don't get people killed." He moved to a bench across from her and sat down. "I was wrong about you. I want to say that directly." She ran a patch through the barrel. "You were doing your job. You had a new variable and you assessed the risk. That's not wrong." I was dismissive. Yes. He absorbed that. Most people, when they offered an apology and the other person agreed with the criticism instead of deflecting it, got defensive. Cole just absorbed it. Where did you learn to shoot like that? He asked. Long time ago. That's not an answer. I know. Cole was quiet for a moment. Your file, he said. Cross told us it was essentially empty, 3 years missing. Yes. That bothers me. It bothers me too, she said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the irritation of incomplete records and everything to do with what it meant that those records had been specifically removed rather than simply lost. Were you overseas during that time? She looked at him then. Not hostile, just clear. Cole, I'm not going to answer that. Because it's classified. Because the answer is more complicated than what this conversation has room for right now. He seemed to accept that. He stood and then paused. The transmission, he said. The thing on the radio. Still trying to save people who are already dead. You had a reaction to that. I watched your face when you reported it in the debrief. She kept her expression neutral. What reaction? Your jaw tightened for about half a second. Most people wouldn't catch it. He paused. I catch things. She went back to the rifle. Then you know I'm not going to confirm or deny your observation, she said. He left. She set the rifle down and stared at the wall for a moment, alone in the armory with the smell of solvent and cold metal and the weight of a question she'd been carrying for 3 years, still trying to save people who are already dead. The people who were dead had names: Sergeant First Class David Reinhold, Corporal Ana Fuentes, Staff Sergeant Jerome Webb, Private First Class Caleb Marsh. 4 names. 4 people who had been alive on a Tuesday night in a country she still wasn't supposed to have been in, who had known things they weren't supposed to know, and who had died in circumstances that had been officially classified as hostile contact in a forward area and unofficially made to disappear from every accessible record. She'd been in the helicopter when the last one died. She'd heard it on the radio. She'd been the only one who made it out. And for 3 years she had been telling herself that she would find out why. Not for revenge. She didn't think about it in those terms, or tried not to. But because 4 people deserved to have their deaths mean something. Because if someone inside the system had sold their location, that someone was still in the system. Still doing whatever they had been doing when they decided that 4 soldiers were an acceptable cost. Still sitting somewhere behind a desk with a clearance badge and a pension plan. She put the rifle back in the case and closed it. The EOD team's report on the Northwestern feature came back at 16:32 hours. Ferris brought it to Cross, and Cross called Lena to his office. She sat across from him while he read the summary. His face did something controlled and complicated. The shooter, he said, was carrying equipment identified as military-grade manufacture. Specifically, he checked the report, encrypted radio, tactical harness, optical package, that's currently flagged as restricted export technology. He set the paper down. Not insurgent equipment, not black market. Lena said nothing. The rifle was a domestically produced precision platform with modifications that require a licensed armorer. The boots were a specific brand used exclusively by 3 contractor organizations that are all registered to operate in this sector. Cross looked at her steadily. This person was not an outside actor. No, Lena said. They weren't. You knew. I suspected. When? She considered. When the drones failed exactly at the moment he fired. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. Someone adjusted the drone flight path or the coverage map to create and maintain that shadow zone. Someone who had access to the Overwatch parameters. Cross was quiet. The kind of quiet that came from a man who was working through implications he didn't want to arrive at. We have a leak, he said. We have more than a leak. He looked at her. A leak is when information gets out, Lena said. What happened today is when information gets used. Those are different problems. He held her gaze. Is this connected to your missing record? She thought about the transmission on the secondary channel, the specific knowledge it implied. The message that had been crafted. She was increasingly certain it had been crafted deliberately, not improvised, to reference something that only a handful of people in the world knew about. I think, she said carefully, that whoever sent me that radio transmission knew exactly who I was. Not who I am on paper, who I actually am. She paused. which means whoever it was has access to information that officially doesn't exist. Cross put both hands flat on the desk and looked down at them. It was the gesture of a man steadying himself. "Tell me about 3 years ago," he said. "I can't." Lena. First name, a deliberate choice. "I'm trying to protect the people on this team. If there is something from your history that is creating a threat to this unit, I need to know what I'm dealing with." She looked at him for a long moment. "When I can tell you," she said, "I will." He held the look for another few seconds, then nodded, not satisfied, accepting. "General Hale is asking to see you," he said. That stopped her. "He's in the medical bay and he's asking for me specifically?" "By name." Cross picked the report back up. "He said he has something to tell you that he should have said 3 years ago." The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. She stood up. Her hands were steady. Everything else was not. The medical bay was on the far east side of the base, separated from the main barracks by a long corridor that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. It was quiet at this hour, one orderly at the station desk, the particular hush of a place where people were recovering, and noise was the enemy. Hale was in the second room. His left arm was immobilized and there were monitors connected to his chest, but he was upright against the pillow and his eyes were clear. The surgery had been done under local anesthetic. The shoulder wasn't complex enough for general, and Hale had reportedly refused it anyway, which told her something about his threshold for discomfort. He watched her come through the door. She stood at the foot of the bed and waited. "Close the door," he said. She did. "I know you have questions," he said. His voice was rougher than it had probably been this morning, the specific hoarseness of someone who'd been through a physical trauma and hadn't slept. "I've been sitting here for the last 4 hours thinking about how to start, and I don't have a clean version, so I'll give you the honest one." "That'll do," she said. He looked at the window for a moment, the small, frosted rectangle of glass that showed nothing but gray-white light. "Your team's operation 3 years ago was compromised before it started," he said. "The mission parameters were leaked to private interests approximately 48 hours before you deployed. By the time your team was in the field, someone was already waiting for you." The room was very quiet. "I know that," Lena said. He looked at her. "I've always known that," she said. "What I don't know is who authorized the leak." Hale exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that carried weight. "There's someone I need you to find," he said. "Someone who's been building a case, evidence, financial records, communication logs, against the people responsible, for 3 years. Quietly, carefully." He paused. "They've been waiting for an opening, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right person to give it to." Lena stared at him. "Why tell me?" "Because you just took a shot at 840 meters with a bolt-action rifle in 20-kilometer-per-hour wind while lying on a rock in the dark," he said, "and hit what you were aiming at." A pause. "And because my being taken today was not an accident, it was designed to get you here. To this base. To this mission. Someone wanted you in the field again." The implications of that arranged themselves in her mind with the quiet efficiency of a person who processed threat assessments the way other people processed conversation. "Someone wanted us both in that valley," she said. "Yes. The shooter wasn't trying to kill you." Hale's jaw tightened. "No. The shoulder was deliberate. A killing shot from that range by a shooter of that capability, it would have been center mass. It would have been the head." He held her gaze. "They wanted me wounded, vulnerable, dependent on people I trust, and they wanted you in the field, where the only way out was through." The door to the medical bay had a small window set into it. Lena could see the corridor beyond it. Empty, or apparently empty. "Who sent the radio transmission?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, "but whoever it was knew your secondary channel assignment, which came out of base operations." "Yes." The word sat between them. She thought about Ferris in the corner of the debrief room, the mild voice, the careful notes, the specific quality of his attention, which had seemed absent-minded but wasn't. She thought about the fact that Hale had asked for her specifically, by name, and that she hadn't questioned who might have known to pass that request along. She thought about the shooter in the rocks, military equipment, military training, operating inside a drone shadow zone that required inside knowledge to exploit, and the fact that somewhere between here and the valley floor, an investigation was going to be opened that would produce answers only if the people running it wanted answers to be found. "The person you want me to find," she said. "The one building the case." "Yes." "They're already here, aren't they?" Hale looked at her. "They've been here longer than you have," he said. Her hand found the edge of the bed frame, not for support, for something solid. Outside the small window in the door, the corridor was still empty. But somewhere on this base, someone had known her backup frequency. And the same someone was watching right now to see what she did next. She left the medical bay without saying anything else. Not because there was nothing to say, because the corridor outside that door was the kind of place where words became weapons in the wrong hands, and she'd already said enough for one conversation. Hale watched her go. She felt it without looking back. The walk from the medical bay to the main barracks took 4 minutes at a normal pace. She did it in 3, not because she was rushing, but because her stride had shifted into the gear it shifted into when her mind was moving faster than her body, and her body was trying to keep up. The knee complained. She ignored it the same way she'd been ignoring it for 6 hours. Someone on this base had known her secondary channel frequency. That meant one of 3 things. Either the frequency assignment had been leaked after it was generated at 0300, which meant someone with access to the base operations communications log had pulled it and passed it in less than 90 minutes before insertion. Or the frequency had been compromised at the generation stage, which meant someone inside the encryption protocol itself. Or the person who'd transmitted had been given the frequency before the mission parameters were finalized, which meant they'd known Lena was coming before the orders officially went out. She didn't like any of those 3 options. The third one she liked least. Ferris was at the operations desk when she walked in. He was doing something on a laptop that he didn't close when she entered, which either meant he had nothing to hide or he wanted her to think he had nothing to hide. She sat down across from him without being invited. He looked up. "Sergeant Voss." "Ferris." She didn't use his rank. She watched his eyes to see if that registered. It registered slightly, a small adjustment in his posture, almost nothing. "I want to ask you something directly." "All right." "The frequency assignment for the secondary channels. Who handled the generation protocol this morning?" He looked at her steadily. "Base operations ran it. Standard procedure. Lieutenant Garvey on the 0200 shift." "Who else had access to the output log?" "Output logs are available to anyone with Tier 2 clearance and above." He paused. "Which is most of the officer corps on this installation." "That's not a small number." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She studied his face. Ferris had the specific quality of a person who had spent years being underestimated by people who mistook his quietness for absence of thought. She recognized it because she'd spent years cultivating something similar in herself. The strategic invisibility of someone who preferred to know what was happening before announcing that they knew it. "You were taking notes in the debrief," she said. "That's my job." "What did you write down when I described the radio transmission?" A pause. Not long, it was maybe a second and a half. But a second and a half was a long time when you were watching for it. "I wrote down the exact wording," he said. "It seemed specific." "It was specific." Another pause. "Sergeant," he said, and his voice dropped a fraction. Not conspiratorially, just quieter, the way people talked when they were saying something they meant. "I've been on this installation for 4 months. In that time, I've noticed certain things about how information moves here, certain patterns." He closed the laptop. "I'm not going to tell you what those patterns are in this room." She looked at him. "Then where?" He wrote something on a small piece of paper and slid it across the desk. A building number. A time. 2100 hours. She looked at it, then at him. He opened the laptop again. She stood, left the paper on the desk, and walked out. She'd memorized it in 3 seconds. Leaving it behind was a message of its own. Cross found her at 1800. She was at the range. Not shooting. She'd already fired the rifle once today, and that was enough for what the barrel needed. She was running dry fire drills, working the bolt action at speed, the specific repetition of getting the fundamentals back into the body's memory before they faded. It was the kind of practice that looked pointless to people who didn't understand it and looked obvious to people who did. Cross watched her for almost a minute before he spoke. General Hale told me you talked. She kept running the drill. Bolt up, back, forward, down, reset. He said you were helpful, Cross continued. He also said something that I've been thinking about since he said it. She stopped. He stepped up to the barrier beside her. He said the ambush today wasn't an accident. He said someone arranged for him to be in that valley. Cross kept his voice neutral, the tone of a man relaying information rather than reacting to it. And he said that someone also arranged for you to be on this mission. He's right. Cross was quiet for a moment. Somebody pulled strings to put you on this team. Yes. Before we knew Hale was missing. Yes. He processed that. Which means whoever it was knew Hale was going to be taken before it happened. She put the rifle down on the barrier surface. Or they arranged it, or both. The range was empty except for them. Wind moved across the open ground and carried the smell of frost and distant fuel from the motor pool. Somewhere on the base, a generator kicked up a register. Is this connected to what happened to your unit 3 years ago? Cross asked. She looked at him. He met it steadily. I'm asking because I need to know whether I'm managing an operational security problem or whether I'm sitting in the middle of something that started before I arrived and was designed to use my people without my knowledge. The honesty in that, not anger, not accusation, just the blunt statement of what the situation might be, made her recalibrate him upward. She'd already rated him competent. She adjusted toward trustworthy. Probably both, she said. He exhaled through his nose. Great. Cross? She turned to face him fully. I'm going to need 24 hours. I'm following something. If I'm right, I'll bring you what I have and you'll have everything you need to act on it through official channels. She paused. If I'm wrong, then we have a simple leak problem and your security review will find it. And if you're right and something happens to you in the next 24 hours, there's an archive, she said. I don't know where it is yet, but if something happens to me, find Hale and ask him what he was supposed to tell me 3 years ago. He stared at her for a long moment. I don't like this, he said. I know. I'm going to not like it for the next 24 hours, and then you're going to bring me what you have. Yes, sir. He picked up his cap from the barrier surface and put it back on. The rifle, he said. Whitfield wants to apologize to you. He doesn't need to. He wants to. Let him. He turned to leave, then stopped. The shot. 840 meters, moving target in a shadow zone, 1 round. He didn't phrase it as a question. It wasn't moving, she said. It was stationary. I saw the shadow shift. Still. I've made harder ones. He nodded once and walked away. Oh. Whitfield found her at 1900, which was earlier than she expected. He came to the barracks bay while she was eating, a protein bar and cold coffee that tasted like regret, and he stood near her bunk for a moment with the specific discomfort of a man who'd talked himself into something and was now on the far side of the decision with no graceful exit. The museum weapon comment, he said. She looked at him. I take it back. Okay? That's it? Okay. What did you want? He shifted his weight. I don't know. An argument, maybe? Something to push back against. He sat down on the adjacent bunk, uninvited but not unwelcome, and rubbed the back of his neck. 8 years. I've been doing this 8 years, and I have never made a shot like that. I have never even attempted a shot like that under those conditions. You would have. I would have hesitated. Yes, she said. Probably. He looked at her, and whatever he'd expected from that exchange, her agreement wasn't it. How do you not hesitate? He asked. She thought about it. The honest answer was complicated, and she didn't have energy for complicated right now, so she gave him the compressed version. I've already been through the worst thing that could happen, she said. After that, hesitation stops feeling like protection. He sat with that. The unit you lost, he said carefully. 3 years ago. Yes. They were good people? The word hit something. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so insufficient. Good people. David Reinhold, who kept a photograph of his daughter's first birthday in the inside pocket of his vest and looked at it before every insertion. Ana Fuentes, who could read a topographic map faster than anyone Lena had ever served with, and who had a laugh that the whole team could hear from 50 meters. Jerome Webb, who complained constantly and worked harder than anybody. Caleb Marsh, who was 23 and afraid of spiders, and the best door breacher in the company. Yes, she said. They were good people. Whitfield nodded. He didn't push further. That was the right call. You should sleep, he said, standing. You've been up since 0300. So have you. I'm not the one who just climbed a mountain and shot somebody. He moved toward his own bunk. Also, for the record, the rifle is impressive, now that I've seen what you do with it. She finished the protein bar. Get some sleep, Whitfield. He did. She didn't. At 2058, she walked to Building 7. It was an administrative annex on the northwest edge of the base, the kind of structure that housed logistics records and equipment maintenance logs, and all the paperwork of a military installation that kept the operational side functioning, bureaucratic bedrock that nobody paid much attention to because there was nothing exciting in it. Ferris was already there. He was standing at a filing cabinet that had been pushed slightly away from the wall, and when she came in, he looked at the door behind her before he said anything. You're 2 minutes early, he said. I didn't see a reason to wait. He nodded and moved to a table where a laptop was open and several physical files were laid out. Old files, the kind with actual paper inside, the kind that predated the base's digital transition. Sit down, he said. She sat. He stayed standing. 4 months ago, he said, I was assigned here from a lateral intelligence position I held for 2 years at the Regional Coordination Center. He paused. I requested the transfer. Why? Because 2 years ago I found a discrepancy in the financial routing records for a private defense contractor called Meridian Group. Specifically, I found evidence that Meridian was receiving intelligence support, operational parameters, deployment schedules, mission timing, from inside the military communication network. The name landed quietly. Meridian Group. She'd heard that name once, 3 years ago, in a conversation she wasn't supposed to have been part of, in a command facility she wasn't supposed to have been inside, approximately 72 hours before her team went into the field. She hadn't known what it meant then. Go on, she said. Meridian profits from instability in active conflict zones. They have contracts that pay out when operations fail, when peace negotiations collapse, when convoy routes are disrupted. They have significant financial interest in ensuring that certain military objectives are never achieved. He turned the laptop to face her. This is a partial record of those payments. The screen showed a spreadsheet that was dense with numbers and dates and transaction codes. She scanned it quickly. Her eyes stopped on a column of dates toward the right side. 3 years ago. October. The same week. Meridian was paid a 7-figure consulting fee from an account that traces, through 3 layers of shell corporations, to a senior military officer. Ferris tapped the screen. The payment was processed 4 days before an operation in the eastern sector that resulted in the deaths of 4 soldiers and the subsequent erasure of all associated records. She looked up at him. You've had this for 4 months, she said. I've had pieces of it for 4 months. The complete picture took longer. Why not go to the Inspector General? Why not? Because the person who received that payment currently holds a position that gives him oversight authority over the Inspector General's office for this sector. Ferris closed the laptop. Taking this through official channels is the same as handing it directly to him. Who is it? She asked. Ferris looked at her for a moment. Colonel Marcus Vale. The name sat in the room. She knew the name. Not personally, she'd never met the man, but the way you knew the name of someone who occupied a structural position in the world you worked inside. Vale was a senior operational commander, multiple decorations, oversight authority over 3 forward installations, including this one. He'd testified before military review boards on operational accountability. He'd given a speech 2 years ago about the importance of protecting soldiers in the field. She kept her face still. He's been here, she said, on this installation. He arrives tomorrow morning, Ferris said. Scheduled inspection visit, announced yesterday. He paused. 2 days after you arrived. The timing of that was not an accident. He knows you have this, she said. I believe so. I think someone told him I've been building a case. Ferris moved to the window and looked out at the dark base. I think today's operation was partly designed to assess how much I've found. If the general had died, the investigation into his disappearance would have created access to communication records that I've been using as part of my evidence base. Those records would have been flagged and controlled. And if he lived? Then Vale needed to know who in the field was a threat and who wasn't. He turned. You're the variable he didn't account for. She thought about the radio transmission, the specific knowledge it implied, the voice behind the scrambler. The transmission on my secondary channel, she said. The shooter sent it. Yes, I believe so. The shooter was one of Vale's assets. A contractor. We'll know more when the EOD team's report on the equipment is fully analyzed. Ferris came back to the table. Sergeant, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it correctly. She waited. Your record was not destroyed, he said. It was moved. Everything in the room became very precise. What did you say? The operational records from 3 years ago. Your missions, your assessments, your team's activities, the intelligence your team gathered in the field. It was classified above standard access and moved to a protected archive. Someone with significant authority made sure it wasn't erased. They made sure it was preserved. She was very still. Someone protected it, Ferris said. Someone who knew what it contained and knew that someday it would be needed. Who? He looked at her steadily. General Hale, he said. He's been holding it for 3 years. The space between that sentence and her next breath felt like it lasted longer than it actually did. Hale. Who had been taken in that valley? Who had asked for her by name? Who had said, from a hospital bed with a bullet wound in his shoulder, that he had something to tell her that he should have said 3 years ago? The archive, she said. Do you have access to it? I have part of it. Hale controls the primary access, which is why... Ferris stopped. Which is why taking him today made operational sense, she said. If Hale is dead or incapacitated, the archive access dies with him, or transfers to whoever he designated as a secondary access holder. She looked at him. Did he designate someone? I think, Ferris said carefully, that he designated you. 3 years ago, before the operation, before everything went wrong. She was back in the barracks at 2200 and she lay on her bunk in the dark and stared at the ceiling with the specific focused intensity of a person running calculations in the dark. Hale had protected the records for 3 years while her name was being used as a cautionary tale about soldiers who imagined threats, while 4 people's deaths were being processed as routine losses in a classified forward area, while she rebuilt herself from the wreckage of that Tuesday night into something that could function and move and keep breathing. Hale had been holding the evidence, waiting. She understood now why the ambush today had felt wrong, why the valley had felt like theater. It had been theater, a controlled environment designed to produce specific outcomes, with her and Hale as the primary actors and Vale as the director sitting somewhere clean and distant. What Vale hadn't calculated was the shadow zone. He'd known about the drone coverage, he'd arranged for it, but he hadn't known that she would walk into the briefing room and look at the coverage map with the specific eyes of someone who had spent years finding the places where technology had limits. He hadn't expected her to see it, and because she'd seen it, the shooter was dead instead of Hale. She heard Okafor's breathing from the next bunk, steady, the sleep of someone who'd processed the day and shut it down. Whitfield was audible from across the bay, the barely perceptible sound of someone deeply asleep. She reached under her pillow and checked the secondary radio. No transmissions. She put it back. Vale was arriving tomorrow morning. Whatever this was going to become, it was going to begin accelerating the moment he walked through the gate. She thought about Ferris in Building 7 with his physical files and his careful notes, and 4 months of evidence assembled in a place where the wrong person finding it would end everything. She thought about Hale in the medical bay with his shoulder immobilized and access codes to an archive that contained the names of 4 people who deserved better than to be a financial transaction. She thought about David Reinhold and the photograph of his daughter. She wasn't sure how old that daughter was now. 4 years, maybe. Old enough to know her father wasn't coming back. Old enough that the absence had become part of the shape of her world. Lena closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she was ready. When Cross's voice came over the base intercom at 0530, earlier than any scheduled briefing had warranted, with the specific clipped tone of a man delivering information he hadn't wanted to receive, she was already dressed. All personnel, report to the main briefing room. This is not a drill. I say again, this is not a drill. She picked up the rifle case. She knew before she walked out the door what she was going to find in that briefing room, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The way a situation that had been building toward a point finally arrived at the point, and the people inside it either moved or got moved. She moved. The corridor was already filling with soldiers, confused and half awake, pulling on jackets and checking weapons with the automatic reflex of people who'd been trained to treat unexpected wake-up calls as potential threats. Cole appeared at her shoulder. "You know what this is," he said. "Not yet." "You look like you know." She didn't answer that. The briefing room doors were open. Cross was already at the front. Beside him stood a man she'd never met in person, but recognized from photographs. Tall, decorated, the specific bearing of someone who'd spent decades at the top of a structure and had learned to wear authority like a second skin. Colonel Marcus Vale stood at the front of the room with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes already moving across the assembling soldiers. When his eyes reached Lena, they stopped. She watched his face. For a fraction of a second, barely visible, the kind of tell that only existed if you were already watching for it, something moved behind his expression. Not surprise. Assessment. He was calculating what she knew. She gave him nothing. Just walked to her seat and sat down, the rifle case resting against her leg, and looked at the front of the room with the same steady attention she gave to a target at distance, waiting to see what he did next. Vale cleared his throat. "I'm Colonel Marcus Vale," he said. "I've been asked to oversee the security review of yesterday's incident. Effective immediately, I have authority over all communications and personnel movement on this installation." He paused and let that land. "No one leaves this base without my authorization. All intelligence materials are to be consolidated and submitted to my review team." Another pause. "This includes all personal devices, communication records, and any documentation collected by personnel in relation to yesterday's operation." The room was quiet. Ferris was sitting 3 rows ahead of Lena. She watched the back of his head. He didn't move. He didn't look back at her, but his right hand, resting on the table beside his notepad, closed slowly into a fist. "Questions?" Vale said. Nobody asked anything. That was the worst answer he could have gotten, and he knew it. A room full of soldiers who said nothing and looked at him with flat professional faces was not a room full of people who were reassured by his presence. It was a room full of people who were waiting. Lena kept her eyes on him. He was good. He was very good. The posture, the authority, the performance of institutional legitimacy, it was convincing if you didn't know what to look for. But she'd been looking at people who were hiding something since before this man knew her name. And the tell was always the same. They looked at you too carefully. Not suspicion, calculation. The specific attention of someone who needed to know exactly how much you knew and was trying to extract it from the way you held your face. Vale looked at her one more time before he sat down. She let him look, because what he couldn't see, what the flat, steady expression and the stillness gave away nothing of, was that last night, in a room in Building 7, she had sat across a table from the man who'd spent 4 months building the case against him. And this morning, before Cross's voice came over the intercom, before any of this began, she had taken the most important item from that table. Not the laptop. The files. The physical files in the actual paper that predated the base's digital transition and couldn't be wiped by anyone with access to the server architecture. They were in the rifle case, beside her leg, in the room, with him. Vale dismissed the room at 0610. People filed out in the specific silence of a group that had things to say and had collectively decided not to say them yet. Lena watched the body language, Whitfield's jaw, Cole's hands, Okafor's careful neutral face that was doing too much work to stay neutral. Cross stood at the front beside Vale and said nothing, which was its own kind of communication. She was almost to the door when Vale's voice found her. "Sergeant Voss?" She stopped, didn't turn immediately. Let one beat pass. Not insubordination, just the natural pause of someone registering that they've been addressed. Then she turned. Vale was looking at her with the specific attention of a man who had prepared for this moment. Beside him, Cross was watching both of them with the expression of someone reading a situation they didn't have full context for. "A word," Vale said, "in private." "Of course, sir." Cross moved to leave. Vale held up a hand. "Captain, you should stay." Cross stopped. Vale gestured toward the front of the briefing room, and they moved there. The three of them, the room emptying around them until the last soldier pulled the door shut and left them alone with the residual warmth of 60 bodies and the hum of the overhead lights. Vale turned to face her. "Your record," he said. "I've been reviewing it this morning." "There isn't much to review, sir." "No, there isn't." He let that sit. "I find that curious. A soldier with your apparent capability, yesterday's operation makes that clear enough, with virtually no documented history. I can't speak to the documentation process, sir. Can't or won't." She held his gaze. "Can't, sir. I wasn't responsible for what was documented, or what wasn't." Vale nodded slowly, the nod of a man absorbing an answer while calculating what it concealed. "What I find more curious," he said, "is that you were added to this team 72 hours ago by a request that came through General Hale's office, before the general was reported missing." He paused. "That's an interesting timeline." Cross looked at her then. She caught it in her peripheral vision. He hadn't known that specific detail. "I follow orders, sir," she said. "I don't always know the full reasoning behind assignment decisions." "Of course." Vale clasped his hands behind his back. "I want to make something clear to you, Sergeant. The security review I'm conducting covers everything that happened in that valley and everything that preceded it. That includes personnel decisions, communication records, and any materials collected during or after the operation." He held her eyes. "If you have any documentation, notes, recordings, anything you collected that relates to this mission, I need you to submit it through my review team by 1200 hours today." The rifle case was sitting against her leg. "I understand, sir," she said. "Good." Vale looked at Cross briefly, then back. "That'll be all." She walked out. In the corridor, she kept walking for 30 seconds until she was around a corner and out of sight line of the briefing room door. Then she stopped and stood against the wall and looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. He knew. Not about the files specifically. If he knew about the files, this conversation would have gone differently. But he knew she was a problem. He'd seen it in her face in that briefing room, the same way she'd seen the calculation in his. She had until 1200 hours before his review team started applying pressure. That was 5 hours and 40 minutes. She found Ferris in the operations annex at 0630. He was at his desk, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept, which matched his actual situation. She came through the door and pushed it shut behind her without turning around. "He's going to request your materials by 1200, she said. Ferris looked up. "I know. He'll have people in my office by 1000 at the latest." The digital records. Backed up to 3 separate external locations before he landed. He said it without inflection. Not pride, just information. He can take the laptop and the base server copies. It won't matter. The physical files. He looked at her, then at the rifle case. She set it on the desk and unzipped it, lifted the rifle out. Underneath, in the space that had been built into the case's foam lining, were the physical files she'd taken from Building 7. Ferris looked at them for a moment. "You took them last night." Before he landed, yes. He was quiet for a beat. "What if I'd needed those this morning?" "Did you?" Another beat. "No," he admitted. "They're safer here than in Building 7. He'll search that office before 1000. Ferris reached for the top file and opened it, not to check the contents. He knew the contents, but the reflex of someone who needed to verify that something important was still intact. "He's going to move fast," he said. "If he thinks the case is close to complete, he won't wait for the official review timeline. What does he need to shut it down? He needs to discredit the source of the financial records. The chain of custody on that evidence is the critical point." Ferris tapped the spreadsheet page. These transactions trace to a specific account. If he can argue the account records were fabricated or improperly obtained, the evidentiary value collapses. Can he argue that? He can try. The original records came from a financial intelligence unit that Vale doesn't directly control, but he has allies in that structure and he can apply pressure through them. Ferris looked up. He needs 48 hours and the right pressure points. If the review buries this for long enough, the people who could testify, Hale, primarily, become isolated, and the narrative shifts. Lena thought about Hale in the medical bay. Hale's going to be the first target, she said. His testimony is the cornerstone. Without Hale confirming the connection between the archive and the original operation, the financial records are powerful but incomplete. Vale's defense will be that the account traces are circumstantial. So we need Hale's testimony on record before Vale's review team gets to him. Ferris looked at her. His shoulder surgery was this morning, she said. He's going to be sedated until at least 1,000. Which Vale knows. Which gives us a window. Ferris sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. The specific gesture of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and institutional anger for 4 months and was feeling the accumulated weight of it. There's something else, he said. She waited. Last night, after you left Building 7, I got a message through the secondary intelligence channel, encrypted, source verified. He opened a drawer and took out a printed sheet, a single page, dense text. From a contact at the Regional Coordination Center, she's been tracking Meridian Group's financial structure independently. He slid the page across the desk. She read it. It took her approximately 90 seconds. She read it twice. Then she set it down. Vale didn't just take money from Meridian, she said. No. He has an ownership stake, through the shell structure. 17%, held through 2 intermediaries and a blind trust registered in a jurisdiction that doesn't cooperate with military financial review. Ferris pulled the page back. The peace negotiation your team was protecting 3 years ago, if it had succeeded, it would have ended the primary conflict that Meridian's contracts were built on. The company stood to lose approximately $400 million in projected revenue over 5 years. The number sat in the room. $400 million, 4 soldiers. She kept her face still. That's the motive, she said. That's the documented motive, yes. You have this in the external backup. Everything. The ownership structure, the transaction records, the timeline. Ferris looked at her. What I don't have, what I need, is someone who was there, who can testify to what happened operationally on the ground that night and what the team discovered before the position was compromised. The room was very quiet. She'd known this moment was coming. She'd known it was coming since the helicopter ride in from the plateau, maybe earlier. She'd known it the way you knew a weather system was moving in. You could feel it in the pressure change before you could see the clouds. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until we're in front of an authority that Vale can't reach, she said. Understood. I need that to actually mean something, Ferris, not as a professional courtesy, as a commitment. He looked at her directly. It means something. She pulled her chair closer to the desk, and she began. It took 40 minutes. She hadn't talked about it in 3 years, not in any form, not to anyone who hadn't been there. The specific act of putting it into words was harder than she'd expected, not because the memories were unclear, but because the clarity was the problem. Every detail was precise. The timeline, the communications, the intelligence the team had gathered in the 72 hours before the position was compromised. What David Reinhold had found in the command facility's document cache. What Ana Fuentes had photographed. What all 4 of them had understood in those last hours about what they'd stumbled into, and what Lena had heard on the radio when the position was taken. Ferris listened without interrupting. He made notes. When she finished, he looked at his notepad for a long moment and then looked at her. The document cache, he said. What Reinhold found. Do you know if copies were made? Jerome Webb had a backup drive. Standard practice. We all carried them. Whether it survived, it did. She stopped. The personal effects from the incident site were recovered and logged before the investigation was buried. Ferris said. Some of those effects went into storage at a regional logistics facility. They were never reviewed because the investigation that would have reviewed them was shut down before it reached the personal effects stage. Webb's drive is in a storage log at Regional Facility 7, listed under an administrative reference number rather than a name, which is probably why nobody flagged it for destruction. Ferris looked at her steadily. I requested a copy of that drive 6 weeks ago through a backdoor channel. I have it. She stared at him. You have it. I have it. She sat back. The weight of what he'd just said took a moment to settle. 3 years. Webb's drive. Whatever he'd backed up in the hours before the position was compromised. The document cache, the photographs, the intelligence they'd gathered, sitting in an evidence storage facility under a reference number, waiting. Why didn't you lead with that? She said. Because I needed to know whether your account matched what's on the drive before I told you it existed. He met her eyes. It matches. She didn't say anything for a moment. Vale can't touch the drive without knowing where it is, Ferris continued, and the only person outside the storage facility who knows the reference number is me. And you. And now you, he agreed. Cross came to find her at 0840. She was in the corridor outside the medical bay, not pacing, standing still, the specific controlled stillness of someone conserving everything for what came next. He looked at her, and then at the rifle case, and then at her again. My office, he said. She followed him. In his office, he shut the door and didn't sit down. Neither did she. Vale's review team arrived 20 minutes ago, he said. They're setting up in conference room B. He's requested access to all mission communications from the past 72 hours. He paused. He also asked me privately whether you'd submitted any personal documentation. What did you tell him? That I hadn't personally verified your kit. Cross's voice was flat. Which is true. He looked at her. Voss, I need to know what's in that rifle case. She set the case on his desk and opened it. He looked at the files inside. His face did something careful and complicated. Where did these come from? She told him. Compressed version. Ferris, Building 7, the evidence, the 4 months, the archive. She didn't tell him everything. She told him enough. He listened the way he'd listened at the range, without interruption, without the defensive repositioning of someone receiving information that threatened their worldview. He just took it in. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Colonel Vale, he said, you're telling me that Colonel Vale is the subject of this investigation? Yes, sir. Who is currently on my installation with review authority and direct access to my personnel and communications? Yes, sir. Cross walked to his window and looked out at the base. The motor pool, the barracks, the administrative buildings. Normal morning activity, people moving between structures, a truck pulling out toward the gate. If I go to the Inspector General with this, he said, Vale has oversight influence over that office for this sector. Yes. And if I go up the chain to Vale's commanding authority, those communications go through channels that Vale has visibility on. Yes. He turned from the window. What does Hale say to do? Hale is sedated until at least 1,000, but he told me last night that he has access to a protected archive, the operational records from 3 years ago. His testimony, combined with Ferris's financial documentation and the evidence on Webb's drive, creates a complete picture. Webb's drive. She explained it. Cross sat down. Not defeat. A man putting himself in a position to think clearly. There's an Inspector General Liaison Officer at the regional command level, he said. Brigadier General Sato. She operates independently of the sector oversight structure that Vale influences. I've worked with her. He looked at Lena. If I contact her directly through a channel Vale isn't monitoring and present a preliminary summary, not the full case, just enough to trigger an independent review. She has authority to freeze Vale's review process pending investigation. Can you reach her without it going through base communications? I have a personal satellite phone. Pre-authorization protocol, encrypted, registered to my personal credentials. It doesn't route through base comms. He paused. I've never used it for something like this. Does it work? Yes. Then that's the path. Cross picked up a pen and turned it over in his hands, the specific gesture of someone working through the implications of a decision they'd already made but hadn't verbalized yet. If I make this call, he said, And I'm wrong. You're not wrong. I need to know that with more than your word, Sergeant. She reached into the rifle case and took out the file that contained the financial records, set it on his desk, then the page Ferris had given her, the ownership structure, the Meridian stake, the Shell Corporation chain. He read it. She watched his face while he read. The moment the number reached him, 400 million, something shifted. Not shock. Worse than shock. The specific expression of a person who had respected an institution and was watching that respect update in real time. He set the paper down. "Make the call, sir," she said. He picked up the satellite phone. Hale was awake at 10:05. She knew because Okafor, who'd been assigned to medical support rotation as part of the base's standard secondary duties, sent a single word to Lena's radio on a channel they'd quietly agreed on during the helicopter ride back from the plateau. The word was up. Lena was at the medical bay in 4 minutes. Hale's eyes were clear, but there was the specific weight of someone who'd come through anesthesia and wasn't pretending to be further along than they were. His shoulder was immobilized, the dressing clean. He looked at her when she came through the door, and something settled in his expression. The particular relief of a man who'd been waiting for a specific person and had been uncertain whether that person would arrive. "Vale is here," she said. "I know, word travels." He shifted carefully against the pillow. "How much time do we have?" "Cross is making a call to Brigadier General Sato. If Sato moves fast, Vale's review authority gets frozen before he can reach the archive access protocols. He'll move on the archive before Sato can act." "That's what I think, too." Hale looked at her for a moment. "The archive access is biometric. My credentials plus a physical verification code that I've held for 3 years. He reached toward the side table with his uninjured arm and opened the drawer. His hand came out holding a small sealed card, the kind used for encrypted physical verification, matte black, no markings. He held it out. "You were listed as the secondary access holder," he said. 3 years ago, when I set this up, I listed you by name. I didn't know if you'd survive. I didn't know if any of this would ever be needed." He paused. "But I knew that if someone was going to find the truth, it would need to be someone who had been inside it." She took the card. It was lighter than she expected. It always surprised her how light the things that carried the most weight actually were. "Your testimony," she said. "Ferris needs it on record before Vale's people reach you." "I know." Hale tried to push himself more upright and grimaced. She stepped forward without thinking, adjusting the pillow behind his back. He accepted it without comment. "Get Ferris in here, and Cross, if he's available." "Cross is on the phone." "Then when he's done." She turned to go. "Sergeant?" Hale's voice stopped her. She turned back. He was looking at her with the expression she'd seen on the extraction plateau. Not recognition exactly. Something older than recognition. "I should have protected your team. I had intelligence suggesting the mission had been compromised, and I was told the intelligence was unverified." He held her eyes. "I chose to trust the institution instead of the information. That was a mistake that I have been carrying for 3 years." The medical bay was very quiet. "I know," she said. I know," she said again. Not dismissive. Final. The specific tone of someone who had processed a thing completely and didn't need it reopened. He nodded. She left. Vel came to the medical bay at 10:50. Lena knew he was coming because Cole, who had been deployed in a corridor near the administrative wing, radioed her a position update with the casualness of someone reporting nothing significant. She'd asked Cole at 0900 to do exactly that. He hadn't asked why. He'd just said yes, which told her something about where he'd landed since yesterday. She was in the corridor outside the medical bay when Vale arrived with 2 members of his review team, both in clean uniforms, carrying tablets. The specific look of people whose job was to look official and process information toward a predetermined conclusion. Vale saw her. He stopped. His review team stopped a half step behind him. "Sergeant?" he said. "Colonel." She stayed where she was, directly in front of the medical bay door. Not blocking it exactly, just there. "General Hale is currently being interviewed by Lieutenant Ferris as part of the incident documentation process. Standard debrief protocol." Vale looked at the door, then at her. Ferris doesn't have authority to conduct a formal interview under my review structure. He's not conducting a formal interview under your review structure, sir. He's conducting a standard post-operation debrief as part of base documentation protocol, which falls under Captain Cross's operational authority. She paused. Which predates your review authority on this installation. The review team member on Vale's left shifted slightly. The one on his right looked at his tablet. Vale's jaw tightened, just slightly. Step aside, Sergeant. I'm not in your way, sir. I'm ordering you to... Colonel Vale. Cross's voice came from the far end of the corridor. Everyone turned. Cross was walking toward them with a specific kind of stride that Lena recognized from the range. Deliberate, unhurried. The walk of a man who had made a decision and was now executing it. He stopped beside Lena. General Sato's office has initiated a preliminary review under Independent Inspector General authority, Cross said, effective as of 40 minutes ago. Under that authority, all materials and personnel related to this incident are subject to independent review protocol. He held Vale's gaze. That includes the interview currently being conducted in that room, which will proceed without interruption. Vale was very still. Something moved behind his eyes. The calculation that Lena had watched him run since the briefing room, arriving now at an answer he didn't want. Cross, he said. His voice had shifted. Lower, the performed authority stripped back to something harder underneath. You don't understand what you're doing. I think I do, sir. This is a significant mistake. Then I'll be accountable for it. Vale looked at Lena. She looked back. The corridor was completely silent except for the generator hum and the distant bass sounds that continued indifferent to what was happening in this particular hallway. Vale's right hand moved, not toward anything, just a small involuntary flex, the body responding to a situation the mind was trying to control. Then he turned and walked back the way he'd come. His review team followed. Cross stood beside Lena, and they both watched until the three figures turned the corner and were gone. She let out a breath that she hadn't consciously been holding. Sato's office is moving fast? She asked. She's sending a team, 6 hours. Cross kept looking at the empty corridor. She wants everything we have, the financial records, the archive access, Hale's testimony, all of it, packaged and ready when her people land. We'll have it. Vale is not going to sit quietly for 6 hours. No, she agreed. He isn't. Cross turned to look at her. The files in your rifle case. They'll be with Sato's team before Vale can make a formal request to seize them. And the drive? Webb's drive? Ferris has a secure transmission protocol. The digital content is already in transit to Sato's office. She'd confirmed that with Ferris 20 minutes ago. The chain of custody documentation goes with it. Cross rubbed the side of his face. He looked tired. Not the tired of someone who hadn't slept, the tired of a person who'd been carrying something they hadn't known they were carrying and had just put it down. The shooter in the valley, he said. He was Vale's asset. Yes. And the radio transmission on your secondary channel. Probably the shooter, yes. Vale would have wanted confirmation that I was manageable, that I didn't know enough to be a threat. She paused. He miscalculated. What made him miscalculate? She thought about it. He erased my record, she said. He thought that made me less credible, less dangerous. She looked at the medical bay door. He forgot that the record was never the point. Cross was quiet for a moment. What he said to me, he said. You don't understand what you're doing. He wasn't talking about the review. No. He was telling you something. She'd caught it too. The specific subtext of a man who was running out of clean options and beginning to consider the ones that weren't. He's going to try to leak the traitor narrative, she said. Fake evidence. Position me as the source of the compromise. She'd been thinking about this since the medical bay. It's what people in his position do when direct pressure fails. They shift the story. Do we have enough to counter it if he does? She thought about the card in her pocket. The archive. 3 years of preserved operational records, protected by a man who'd carried his own guilt like ballast against the day it could be used for something better than regret. Yes, she said. You're certain. The archive contains everything my team found in those 72 hours. The original intelligence, the document cache, the evidence that showed who had compromised the mission before the mission even began. She kept her voice even. If Vale tries to make me the story, we open the archive, and the archive makes him the story instead. Cross nodded slowly. Ferris opened the medical bay door. He looked at both of them. His face was the face of a man who had spent 4 months building toward a moment and was now standing inside it, and the reality of it was both exactly what he'd worked for and nothing like what he'd imagined. "Hale is ready," he said. "We should move quickly." They moved. The medical bay felt smaller with 4 people in it. Hale sat upright against the pillow, the immobilized arm making him look asymmetrical in a way that the general's bearing kept fighting against. Ferris had his notepad and a recording device, small, encrypted, the kind that didn't look like a recording device. Cross stood near the door. Lena stayed close to the window, which gave her a sightline down the corridor outside. Ferris set the recorder on the side table. "General Hale, for the record, you're consenting to this interview voluntarily outside the authority of Colonel Vale's review structure under standard post-operation documentation protocol." "I am," Hale said. "And you understand that this recording will be transmitted to Brigadier General Sato's office as part of an independent Inspector General preliminary review." "I understand." Ferris clicked the recorder on. What followed was 43 minutes that Lena would remember for the rest of her life, though not the way she expected to remember important things. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was a man in a hospital bed talking in a measured, careful voice about events that had happened 3 years ago, and the specific combination of institutional failure and personal cowardice that had allowed those events to produce the outcome they produced. Hale talked about the intelligence report that had crossed his desk 4 days before the operation. The assessment from a signals intercept unit suggesting that an outside party had received detailed information about the mission parameters. He talked about the pressure he'd received to proceed, not explicit pressure, nothing as clean as a direct order, but the specific accumulated weight of institutional expectation that told a senior officer that unverified intelligence suggesting a compromise was less damaging to act on than the embarrassment of pulling a classified operation on uncertain grounds. He talked about receiving the after-action report, the first version, the one that said 4 soldiers were dead, and the cause was listed as hostile contact at a forward position. He talked about the specific way that report had landed on his desk, and the specific way he had read it and known, without being able to prove it and without entirely admitting it to himself, that the version he was reading was not the complete truth. He talked about the archive. "I began preserving materials 6 weeks after the incident," he said. "Anything that connected to that operation. Communications records, equipment logs, the original mission parameters, the intelligence assessments. I had enough authority and enough relationships in the record structure to keep those materials from being fully expunged." He looked at his immobilized shoulder. "I told myself I was building a case, that I was waiting for the right moment." He paused. "I was also, I think, managing my own conscience. Doing something felt better than doing nothing. Whether it was actually useful was a question I avoided answering." Ferris's pen moved. "General?" Cross said from near the door. His voice was careful. "Did you know, when you arranged for Sergeant Voss to be assigned to this team, what was likely to happen in that valley?" Hale was quiet for a moment. "I knew Vale was monitoring Ferris's investigation. I knew that monitoring had reached a point where Vale would need to act, either to shut the investigation down or to discredit it." He met Cross's eyes. "I believed that bringing Sergeant Voss into the field would create a situation where the evidence would either come to light or be permanently lost. I made a calculated decision." "You used her as bait," Cross said. The word landed flat in the room. Hale didn't flinch from it. "Yes," he said. "That's an accurate description." Lena kept her eyes on the corridor outside the window. She'd known this. She'd known it since the plateau, maybe earlier. Knowing it and hearing it said out loud were different experiences, and she let the difference register without doing anything with it, because there wasn't anything useful to do with it right now. "Sergeant?" Hale's voice. She turned. He was looking at her directly. The general's bearing, but without the armor of it. just the face underneath. "I'm asking your forgiveness," he said. "Not for your record being erased. I couldn't stop that. For choosing to use you instead of simply telling you. I told myself that bringing you in cleanly would have tipped Vale off. That was partly true and partly a justification for not having to look you in the eye and ask." The room was very quiet. Cross was watching her. Ferris had stopped writing. She looked at Hale for a long moment. "David Reinhold's daughter," she said. "How old is she now?" Hale blinked, recalibrating. 4 years old, I believe 4. Her name is Sophie." Lena looked at the window. "Reinhold showed me a photograph of her birthday. She was 1 year old, chocolate cake on her face." She paused. "He talked about her, more than he probably intended to. You could hear it when he did, the specific way someone talks about a thing that is the best thing in their life." Nobody spoke. "Ana Fuentes had a brother in Tucson," Lena continued. "Jerome Webb had been planning to get out after this deployment and go back to school. Caleb Marsh was afraid of spiders." She let that sit. "I don't need your forgiveness conversation, General. I need their names on the right side of the record." Hale's jaw moved. "That I can give you," he said quietly. "Then give it." She turned back to the window. Men. At 11:40, Vale made his move. She'd expected it would come through official channels, a formal demand, a communication to Cross, something with the procedural trappings of authority. That's what people in Vale's position typically did when they were losing ground. They generated paperwork. They created the appearance of process. Instead, it came through a statement released to the base's internal communications network at 11:42 hours. 3 paragraphs, clean language, institutional tone. The statement identified Sergeant Lena Voss as a person of interest in the investigation of the Valley incident. It cited her blank service record, her unauthorized assignment to the mission team, and what it described as anomalous behavior in the field. Specifically, the claim that she had been the only team member to receive a transmission on the secondary encrypted channel, which the statement called unverified and potentially fabricated. The 4th paragraph was the one that mattered. It stated that materials in Sergeant Voss's possession were believed to include classified documentation improperly obtained from base intelligence files, and that she was to be detained pending review. Cole came to find her 6 minutes after the statement went out. She was already moving when he found her, heading toward the communications annex, rifle case over her shoulder, the files inside it, moving with the specific economy of someone who had anticipated this and had already decided what to do about it. Cole fell in beside her. "I saw it," he said. "I know." "Is it true?" "The fabrication part." "No." He walked with her for a few steps. "Okay," he said. "Just that." "Okay." She looked at him sideways. "I told you not to get people killed," he said. "You didn't. You got the general out, and you took a shot that I couldn't have made under those conditions." He kept walking. "I evaluate people on what I see, not on what somebody puts in a memo." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Okafor appeared from a side corridor, fell in on her other side without a word, which was very Okafor, and the 3 of them reached the communications annex together. Ferris was already there. He had the laptop open and a transmission window ready. The physical files from the rifle case were on the table, already photographed, the image files packaged for transmission. Vale's statement went to the base network, Ferris said. He's going to make a formal detention request through Cross inside the next 20 minutes. What's Sato's status? Her team is 2 hours out. She got my preliminary transmission, and she's authorized a hold on all personnel actions pending her arrival. But that authorization needs to reach Cross before Vale's detention request does. Lena set the rifle case on the table and opened it. Transmit everything, she said. Webb's drive content, the financial records, the ownership documentation, Hale's testimony recording, all of it, right now to Sato's office. In progress. Ferris was already working. 15 minutes for the full package. Then we have 15 minutes. She looked at Cole. Hale needs somebody with him. Vale's next move after the detention request will be to access the medical bay before Sato's people arrive. On it, Cole said. He left. Okafor stayed. Ferris transmitted. 12 minutes passed in a silence that was not actually silent. It was full of the ambient sounds of a base operating normally around a situation that was anything but. The specific cognitive dissonance of an institutional crisis happening inside an institution that hadn't stopped for it. At minute 13, Cross came through the door. He looked at Ferris's screen, at the transmission progress, at Lena. "Vale's formal detention request is in my inbox," he said. "What's your response?" "I haven't opened it yet." He said it with the particular precision of a man who had found a technically accurate way to be strategically blind. "I was occupied in the communications annex when it arrived." Ferris said, "Transmission complete." The three of them looked at the screen. Complete. Everything they had. 3 years of preserved evidence, 4 months of financial investigation, 1 recorded testimony, 1 dead soldier's backup drive, containing whatever David Reinhold and Ana Fuentes and Jerome Webb had found in those 72 hours before the world went wrong, was now in Brigadier General Sato's possession. Lena sat down for the first time in what felt like a very long time. Her knee was talking to her again. She'd been ignoring it since the mountain, and it had run out of patience. Cross sat down across from her. "It's done?" he asked. "The transmission is done," Ferris said. "The rest is in Sato's hands." Cross looked at Lena. "Vale is going to fight this." "I know. He has resources, relationships, people in structures above Sato who owe him favors." "I know. This might not end cleanly." She looked at him. "It doesn't need to end cleanly. It needs to end correctly." He sat with that for a moment. "The statement he put out," Cross said, "about you, the fabrication allegation. It'll be answered by the archive. You're not angry about it." She thought about that. She ran her thumb along the edge of the rifle case, the worn corner where the canvas had started to separate from the frame, a repair she'd made with electrical tape somewhere over the Pacific 3 years ago. "I've been called worse things by more dangerous people," she said, "and I'm still here." Sato's team landed at 1347. 3 people. 2 investigators in civilian clothes and a uniformed JAG officer who carried a briefcase and moved with the specific competence of someone who had done this before and found the repetition neither exciting nor difficult, just necessary. Sato herself was not with them. She was at the regional command center, presiding over what her team leader, a woman named Major Hendricks, described as a rapidly expanding situation. Hendricks was mid-40s, sharp-faced, the kind of person who got a lot done by appearing to be doing very little. She set up in Conference Room A, deliberately not Conference Room B, where Vale's review team had established their operation, and began working through the transmitted materials with an efficiency that was almost aggressive. Vale's review team on the other side of the building went quiet. That was its own kind of answer. Cross formally declined to act on Vale's detention request, citing Sato's personnel hold authorization, and submitted both documents to Hendricks within the first 20 minutes. Hendricks read them and said, "Good. Just that." The archive access happened at 1500 hours. Lena used the card Hale had given her, combined with the biometric verification that the system required, a fingerprint scan run through a remote server that Hale had established 3 years ago, and the archive opened. She had expected something dramatic, some visual evidence of its contents, some manifestation of 3 years of carefully preserved truth. What she got was a file directory, hundreds of documents organized by date and category, mission parameters, communications records, equipment logs, intelligence assessments, photographs. And at the end of the directory, filed under a date she recognized, the date of the insertion 3 years ago, a single document marked with a classification code she'd never seen before, designated by a name rather than a number. The name was Reinhold Final. She opened it. It was a field report, handwritten and photographed, the scan slightly uneven because it had been done quickly, probably on a phone, probably under field conditions. Reinhold's handwriting. She recognized it. She'd seen it on the birthday card he'd written to his daughter that he kept folded inside the photograph. He'd shown her once, on a transport flight, the way people showed you things when they weren't sure how much longer they'd have the chance to show them. The field report was 2 pages. It detailed what the team had found in the document cache. The communication records between Meridian Group and a routing address that traced, with the specificity that came from a soldier who'd spent years reading intelligence products, to a senior military officer's personal administrative account. The report named the account. The account name was Marcus Vale. The date on the report was 48 hours before the position was compromised. At the bottom, in handwriting that was slightly more uneven than the rest, the specific unevenness of someone writing fast or under stress, or both, was a single line that hadn't been in the original intelligence summary. If Lena survives, trust her. She is the only one who will find the truth. She read it twice. Then she sat in the chair in the communications annex with the screen in front of her, and she didn't move for a long time. Not crying. She'd done that a long time ago, in private, in the way that grief happened when you'd been trained to manage everything, and the management itself became a kind of damage. What she felt now was different, quieter. The specific stillness of a weight that had been carried for 3 years and had just not disappeared. Weights like this didn't disappear, but shifted, settled into a different position where it could be carried differently. He'd written it for her. He'd known. She pressed her hand flat on the desk and breathed. Hendricks presented her preliminary findings to Cross and Hale, who'd been moved to the conference room in a wheelchair, the immobilized arm making him look diminished in a way that his expression absolutely refused to confirm. At 1700 hours. Ferris sat to one side. Lena sat across from Hale. Vale was not in the room. He was, Hendricks reported with the neutral tone of a person relaying logistics, currently in a separate room with the JAG officer, where he had been since 1430 hours. Based on the materials transmitted this morning and the archive documentation accessed this afternoon, Hendricks said, we have sufficient grounds for a formal investigation under military criminal code. Financial misconduct, conspiracy to obstruct justice, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, and accessory liability in connection with the deaths of 4 soldiers 3 years ago. She looked around the table. A formal arrest and charges will be processed through Sato's office. Vale will be transported off this installation today. The room was quiet. The 4 soldiers, Hale said, Reinhold, Fuentes, Webb, Marsh, their records. Will be fully restored, Hendricks said, with appropriate recognition for the intelligence work they completed in the field. That process will be initiated through the records office as part of the corrective action. She paused. It takes time. The bureaucracy moves at its own pace, but it will happen. Hale nodded. He looked at Lena. She looked back. There was something unfinished in that look. The accounting between them, the specific complicated debt of a man who had made a calculation that put her in the field and had been right about the outcome but wrong about the method. She didn't know what to do with it, and she suspected he didn't either. Maybe that was the honest version of forgiveness. Not resolution, just the acknowledgement that some things were too heavy to set down entirely, and the best you could do was carry them less alone. She looked away first. Awesome. Vale was escorted off the base at 1820. She didn't watch from outside. She heard the vehicle leave from inside the barracks, the specific sound of an official transport moving through the gate, and that was enough. Some things you didn't need to witness to know they had happened. Whitfield was in the barracks bay when she came back. He was sitting on his bunk doing nothing, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. He looked up when she came in. "It's over?" he said. "The immediate part." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something and wasn't sure if this was the right time, or if there was ever a right time for what he was trying to say. 3 years, he said finally. They just erased 3 years of you. Yes. And you kept going. She sat down on her own bunk and started working the zipper on the rifle case with the automatic movements of someone whose hands needed something to do. "What else was I going to do?" she said. He thought about it. "I don't know. Most people didn't watch 4 soldiers die because someone decided they were worth less than a financial contract." She kept her hands moving. "That changes what most people would do means." He was quiet for a moment. "Reinhold," he said. "Webb, the others. You knew them." "Yes." "Were they—" He stopped. "Good?" she said. "Yes, not perfect. Nobody in the field is perfect. But good." She looked at him. Reinhold used to misplace his radio headset, constantly. Every single deployment, it was a crisis finding his headset. Fuentes snored. Webb argued about everything. You'd give him a direct order and he'd find 4 alternative approaches and defend each of them for 10 minutes before doing what you said. She felt something move in her chest. Marsh was 23 and terrified of house spiders. Carried a can of Raid in his personal kit like it was ammunition. Whitfield made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite something else. "He sounds like my little brother," he said. Marsh would have liked that comparison, she said. He liked people. The barracks was quiet around them. Outside, somewhere on the base, the evening shift was rotating in. Normal sounds, the base keeping going the way bases kept going regardless of what happened inside them. "Your record," Whitfield said. "They're going to restore it?" That's what Hendricks said. "Full restoration? Everything from the missing 3 years?" "Everything from the missing 3 years plus whatever Hale preserved in the archive." She ran her thumb along the rifle's barrel. "It'll take time. The process takes time." "But it'll happen." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, what I said when you landed. The museum weapon comment. You already apologized for that." "I know. I'm not apologizing again." He looked at the rifle. "I'm saying that I understand now that the weapon was never the point. The weapon was just the thing I looked at instead of looking at you." She looked at him. He shrugged, slightly uncomfortable with his own honesty. "I evaluate things by what I can measure, specs, ratings, equipment categories. It's faster. It's also wrong, sometimes." "Yeah," he said. "It is." Cross found her at the range again, just after 2,000 hours. She wasn't running drills this time. She was just standing there in the dark, the rifle case on the barrier in front of her, not opened. The range lights were off. The mountains to the north were black shapes against a sky that was starting to show stars. He stood beside her. "Hendricks is asking for a final statement from you," he said. "Tomorrow morning. Formal record." "I'll be there." He was quiet for a moment. "Hale asked me to give you something," he said. She turned. He held out a folded paper. She took it, unfolded it. It was a copy of a document she recognized, the cover page of the operational file from 3 years ago. The classified mission that had no name, only a number. The mission that had disappeared from every official record, except across the top, in a notation she'd never seen because this document had been in the archive, was a handwritten comment in ink. Old ink, 3 years old, in handwriting that wasn't Reinhold's and wasn't Hale's. It was in the handwriting of the operational authorization officer who had signed the mission approval. The comment read, "This team did everything right." Underneath it, a date. The date was 2 days after the insertion, 2 days after the position was compromised, 2 days after 4 people died. Someone had written that and filed it, and it had gone into the archive with everything else. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "You okay?" Cross asked. She thought about that question. The honest answer was complicated and incomplete and probably not fully answerable yet. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at the dark mountains. "Reinhold's daughter is 4 years old," she said. "She doesn't know yet what her father did. She doesn't know that he wrote a field report under hostile conditions that ultimately broke open a 3-year conspiracy and got the people responsible brought to account." She paused. "She'll know someday. When she's old enough, there'll be a record she can read. A real one. That says her father was there, and what he did mattered." Cross was quiet. "That's why I kept going," she said. "Not for me. Not even for them exactly. For the version of the truth that existed in that valley, that those 4 people spent their last hours documenting, that deserved to still be true after they were gone." She picked up the rifle case. "I'm okay," she said. "I'll be better eventually." Cross nodded once, not trying to fix it, just accepting it. She walked off the range. But in the morning, the base looked the same as it always had. Motor pool, barracks, administrative buildings, the communications annex, the range, the mountains to the north, still cold, still indifferent to the specific dramas of the people living in their shadow. She gave her statement to Hendricks at 800. It took 90 minutes, and she told the truth about all of it, including the parts that made her look afraid, because the truth was more useful than the edited version, and the edited version was something she was done with. At 1,000, Hale's full record restoration order was filed as part of the corrective action process. At 1015, the restoration of her record was initiated. Hendrick's JAG officer walked her through the paperwork, the specific bureaucratic artifact of 3 years being officially acknowledged, each blank page getting its content restored from the archive. Missions, operations, assessments, commendations she'd never received because they'd been filed and then buried. At 10:30, the records for David Reinhold, Ana Fuentes, Jerome Webb, and Caleb Marsh were submitted for posthumous correction and recognition. That was the one that took the longest to sign. Not because the paperwork was complex, because her hand stopped cooperating for about 30 seconds somewhere in the middle of it, and she had to wait for it to start again. The JAG officer waited without commenting. She finished. At 1100, Cross called the full team together. They assembled in the briefing room: Whitfield, Cole, Okafor, Ferris, Lena. Cross stood at the front without a presentation behind him, without the topographic maps and drone feeds. Just the room and 6 people. "I want to say something on the record," he said, "before this team disperses and everyone goes back to their assignments." He looked around the table. What happened in that valley, and what happened on this base in the past 48 hours, happened because some people decided that the truth mattered more than their own comfort. That's not guaranteed, that's a choice. Every time. He paused. The 4 soldiers who died 3 years ago made that choice in a hostile field under the worst possible conditions. Sergeant Voss made it when she walked onto this base carrying a rifle that everyone laughed at and said nothing, because she was here to do a job, and she did it. He looked at her briefly. Ferris made it over 4 months of quiet work that nobody knew about. All of you made it when you decided in the past 2 days to trust what you were seeing instead of the authority of the person telling you to look away. The room was quiet. Cole was looking at the table. Okafor was looking at Cross. Whitfield was looking at his hands. "That's all I wanted to say," Cross said. He sat down. It wasn't a speech that resolved everything. It wasn't meant to. Some things didn't resolve. They just became part of what you carried, and you decided whether what you carried made you heavier or steadier. Lena looked at the rifle case beside her chair. After the meeting, in the corridor, Whitfield fell in beside her. "What happens to you now?" he said. "Reassignment, probably. Once the record restoration is processed, I'll go back into the regular rotation." "You gonna take it?" She looked at him. "Take what?" "The reassignment, the regular rotation." He paused. "Or are you done?" She thought about it. The honest answer had changed recently and hadn't finished settling yet. "I'm not done," she said. "I thought I might be at some point in the past 3 years, but I'm not." "Because of them? Reinhold and the others?" "Because of me," she said. "Because I'm still good at this. And walking away from something you're good at because someone tried to take it from you is letting them win retroactively." Whitfield was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "when you first walked off that helicopter with the rifle, I looked at you and I thought, this is a mistake. Someone put the wrong person on this team. I know you did. I was looking at the wrong thing." "People usually are," she said. "That's what they count on." He extended his hand. She looked at it, then shook it. His grip was firm. Hers was firmer. He walked away down the corridor. She stood alone for a moment in the institutional quiet of a military base, in the middle of a morning that looked, from the outside, like any other morning. Then she picked up the rifle case and walked toward the light at the end of the corridor, where the door was open and the mountains were visible in the distance, still cold, still immovable, unchanged by anything that had happened in the past 48 hours or the past 3 years. The difference was that now, when she looked at them, she didn't see the valley where 4 people died. She saw the ridgeline where she'd taken the shot, and the shadow zone she'd found because she'd known to look for it, and the truth that had survived being buried because someone had made sure it was too well hidden to be fully erased, and someone else had been stubborn enough to find it. She walked out into the morning. The soldier they erased had come back, not to be restored or vindicated or celebrated, just to finish what 4 people had started in a valley that no one was supposed to know about in the 72 hours before the world tried to make them disappear. She'd finished it. It was enough. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone who is fighting for the truth is make them invisible. Because invisible people have nothing left to lose, and nothing left to lose is the most powerful position in any room.